Hey everyone, this is the HOPEcast from Hope Church RVA. I'm Rachel and I'm part of our communications team here at Hope, joined today by our senior pastor, David Dwight. We are here to have a conversation about some common questions in life and faith in about 30 minutes. And today we're going to talk about what matters more, character or competence. So David, recently you were sharing with our staff in kind of a development lunch this idea of a maturity gap index. And we can share that kind of graphic in the show notes so people can see what we're talking about. But the idea mainly was that over time, your character increases and your competency maybe even kind of starts higher. You know, you go to school or you learn some training, you've got some skills and abilities, and that over time, there's this point where they almost converge. Mm-hmm. And so maybe one's slightly on the decline as you age, and maybe the character's on the up, and there's this moment where they kind of connect. Mm-hmm. And it was later in life than I had expected, as somebody kind of maybe earlier in my career, earlier in my trajectory of life and things, I was struck by the fact that, I've got a ways to go perhaps before my character might catch up with my competence. And I would love for you to share more about kind of where that came out of and what we do with the knowledge that maybe character actually takes a little bit more time to develop than we might think or hope.
Yeah, that's great. So the idea that you're referring to, this quote, maturity gap index, is something that I learned about in a seminar a few years ago. And it was taught by a guy named Jimmy Dodd. And he has a ministry that is all around sort of training ministry people and pastors and so on. So the maturity gap index, it's like when you have been thinking and observing things and then somebody puts a sentence to it and you're like, okay, now I can name this batch of thoughts I've had.
Yeah, that's called maturity gap index.
Yeah. So basically the idea is the way he describes it. Take a person who is smart, bright, gifted, capable, okay? And they're in their 20s, okay? I'm going to try to be graceful, but I'm going to say that's you. When I was in my 20s, it was me. Smart, bright, capable, gifted, and people have been telling you this. You're smart, bright, capable, gifted. Right? And occasionally people are like, oh, wow, you're going to do great things and it's going to be awesome to see what you do. And so we're in our 20s. We have energy, vision, some gifting, some capability, and we're like just ready to go.
Yep.
We're like ready to change the world. And by golly, we're going to do it. But what we don't have is experience.
Yeah.
Do you remember this? I'm sure it happens to almost everybody. I can remember this from the time I was like in high school applying for summer jobs to all the way down the line. And you get an answer, which is, we really like your resume, blah, 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 but we need a person who has more experience.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And when you don't have much experience, you kind of don't get that.
Yes.
Because you're like, I'm smart, bright, capable. I can do it.
Yeah.
But it's a person who has experience saying, I appreciate all that, but we need experience. And then you're like, well, how am I going to get experience if I don't get given a job? Right? So you feel caught in this catch-22. And experience feels like that. It feels like this elusive thing that's very hard to name. But here's what I can say now, because now I'm 58 and I got a bunch of it. Now I get it.
Yeah,
now I get it.
Yeah.
But I remember so well being like a teenager in my 20s, being so frustrated by that idea.
I've been there recently.
Yeah. And so experience is this invisible thing that is the accumulated wisdom, discernment, knowledge, load-bearing capability, decision-making insight, appreciation for nuance and how to handle tough things. And all of that kind of stuff is really huge in leadership.
Yeah.
But the irony about experience is this is going to sound so dumb, you can't get it without getting it.
Right.
You can't get experience without going through a whole bunch of things, many of them being hard and challenging. And on the one hand, we're like, well, those aren't a big deal, but they are a big deal because the accumulation of the library of insight and character development, tenacity, perspective, decision-making that comes as your experience bank grows is huge.
Oh, yeah.
So going back to the maturity gap index, Jimmy Dodd's illustration, he's like, when we're in our 20s, we are just operating out of our gifting, our skills, and maybe our personality. You know, smart, fun, energetic. I mean, people like to be around. They're like energized by us. You can sort of wow people with your skills, with your giftings and capabilities. But we're in our 20s. We don't have experience. We don't have a deep foundation and bedrock of character formation yet.
Yeah.
So why is that character formation important? Well, it will shape how we handle situations. It will shape the decisions we make. It will increase our capacity. It will increase our stability. And all of these things are intangibles, but they're massively important, particularly in leadership-oriented environments. So the idea is he draws this line, and you mentioned maybe we can provide a graphic for this, but basically a line on a graph is that our skill level is high on the line, and it's hopefully going up and to the right. Hopefully it starts for the bright, capable, gifted person. It starts pretty high, and hopefully it's going up. And the character line starts a good ways below the skill line because we don't have the experience and the formation and the judgment, discernment, wisdom that comes with the years.
Which isn't also to say none.
Right.
Some.
That's right.
Sure.
That's
just
right.
not nearly the extent that...
Well, and it's important. I agree with you 100%. It's also important that when we say the character line, this is not a moral statement. We're not talking about a good or bad person.
Sure.
Character is the fiber of who we are. And so because we're young, we don't have as much of it.
Right.
And so the character line is a good bit below the skill line.
Sure.
And over time, that character is a curve, and it's curving upward. And as you described in the introduction, there comes a time where those lines meet, they intersect. And the character line intersects with the skill line. From Jimmy Dodd's research, he had that intersecting at 53 years old. This is where the amount of experience, wisdom, life experience, work experience, the whole ball of wax catches up to and intersects with the skill line. So really what that is saying is at about the age of 53, you're hitting your real sweet spot in terms of, let's just generally call it leadership, influence, and capability. And then the lines cross, and on the right side of that gap, hopefully your skills are still going up, but sometimes they may not. You may be getting older. You don't have as much energy. You may not have as much physical capability, etc. You can take this idea and apply it in a lot of different settings, right? If it was sports, these lines and the crossing point is much younger. But when we're talking about leadership and so on, the crossing point is at 53 is the age that he has. Hopefully your skill set remains slightly increasing, and your character line is increasing even all the more. So the idea the illustration gives you is, let's use for a healthy, energetic person, 53 until, I don't know, 70, 75, 65. I don't know. It depends on how active and vigorous you are. But the point is, like, the years after 53 are your maximal benefit years because the character development has caught up with the skills, and now you have like that ignition point where the two wires come together.
It's interesting. I'm picturing different people listening to this, right? And me as somebody in my late 20s, like, oof, I got a long way to go. And then some people I can imagine maybe later in their lives are looking at that like, that could feel about right. Or maybe that
Yeah.
makes sense. I remember even in the room as you were teaching this originally, there were some people in their 50s who really seemed to resonate and feel like they were clicking with this idea that, I feel like I'm coming into it. I feel like I'm coming into my own. It's all kind of syncing up, and I, have the experience of built this foundation and now can really have something valuable out of it.
Yeah, and experience has this intangible way of let's say you're coming up to a hard situation. If you've got a lot of experience, you're like, I've seen things like this before.
Yeah.
If it's hard, right? You can't eliminate that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times hard is, this one is a little different. It's not exactly the same as ones I've seen before, but it's similar.
Sure.
So I've got experience equity built up that gives more discernment, more wisdom, and maybe even more emotional stability. I'm not as rattled by it.
Yes. Yeah.
And it doesn't spook me as much.
Yeah.
Or, criticism is one. If you're in public leadership, which ministry and pastoring is, when you're young and less experienced, you're going to get criticism. It comes with the territory.
Right.
When you're young and inexperienced, it's much more unnerving. When you have a lot more experience, you have a much more stable engagement.
Yeah.
And even, I think, with more experience, a more appreciative engagement. That's another story. But for interest's sake, I have always played a lot of tennis in my life. And there's a lot of talk in the tennis world about 3 professional tennis players, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. And they're all in their 30s, and they're, quote, getting older. Now, Djokovic is the youngest of the 3. He's 34, and he won Wimbledon recently. He's also won the other 2 major tournaments this year. Nadal, I think, is 36, and Federer is 39. Okay? So in a sport like tennis, which requires incredible speed, stamina, energy, coordination, et cetera, right? If you were to use this, quote, maturity gap index idea, that those curves are going to hit, I don't know, probably the max. I'm going to take a guess and say those curves would intersect at about 26 or 7.
Okay.
You've had enough playing experience that you've seen this before.
Sure.
You've had enough playing experience that a big stage with a crowd of 50,000 people doesn't make you so nervous you don't know what to do with it. So, but you're still young enough to have the physical capabilities, right? So Federer is now talking about, he's not performing at the levels he used to. So when you're 39 and you're playing someone who's 27, in tennis, it's a big difference. So not to geek out too far on that, but the point is, when we're talking about leadership, it's 53. But in like a very active sport, that intersection between experience, like skills plus experience and character, it's going to hit much younger. So the maturity gap index, what I find fascinating about it is, one, I hear what you're saying. On the one hand, it can make you feel like, oh my goodness, I've got a long way to go. I hear that. On the other hand, it's very hopeful.
Oh, yeah.
Because
the best is yet to come, right?
It says there's this really beautiful ascending picture of growing in leadership experience. The other thing is, and hopefully around Hope, we have this in the air with our staff, if you're a younger leader and you're experiencing something hard, maybe for the first time, maybe you can go talk to one of our older leaders and say, can you help me sort this through?
Yeah.
And that kind of partnership can also be sort of helpful from a mentoring and so on viewpoint.
Yeah. A little kind of anecdotal example of that. Obviously, we had a massive global pandemic in the last year. And as being part of kind of the senior leadership team at the time, and this kind of interim role I was able to step into, I was by far the youngest person in the room, with excellent leaders who have led in for years and years in different capacities. And when faced with this massive challenge that really no one's ever faced before and could have derailed things pretty quickly because it was a lot. I really looked to the people who have been doing it longer, because I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't have the years of experience under my belt. I haven't faced challenges anywhere near this magnitude. And it was really sweet and beautiful to look and see there are people who have done similar things before, or who have navigated other challenges, other shifts in culture, other, having to cancel a Sunday service and pivot in a different way. And it was to see that play out in a team like that, where there were leaders with more experience, more years, more of that character built up. Mm-hmm. We were able to weather that better. Mm-hmm. And I really saw the value of, there are times where I feel like I've got the energy and I'm young and ideas and here I go. But in those like scenarios, it was really like, wow, these are the people who are going to help us lead well. And I saw that modeled, that they have more of the good stuff, in a sense, that it takes to get through this in a way that is needed and really beautiful, especially in leadership capacities when faced with really hard things.
Tons of little ideas are coming to mind for me. One of them is, for some reason, with leadership, the most frequent metaphor that comes to mind for me, it would be like the captain of an old-time sailing ship.
Yeah, I was picturing a ship too.
Like, take us to 1850 or 1800, right? These are all sailing ships, these big wooden sailing ships. And these captains are crossing the oceans, or maybe they're naval and you've got the whole military battle thing involved too. But the point is, they see storms. And if you got appointed in 1820 to your first captaincy of a ship at, I'll say maybe a young one would have been 28, 30 years old, and you see these big storms and you don't have experience with them, one, emotionally, it really rattles you. Yeah. Secondly, what do we do? What decisions do we make? How do we do this?
Right.
If you take a same scenario, let's say there was another ship a mile away, and the captain is in their late 50s, that captain could be like, not too unnerved. I've seen storms like this before. Can give more peace to the crew, can make decisions differently, the whole bit. So the idea of sort of sailing ships and captains and all that comes to mind for me. My mother used to say to me a lot, I would protest something and I can hear her saying it, "You'll understand when you're older." And it used to drive me nuts. I'd be like, that's irrelevant to what I'm feeling right now. Yeah. Right? But now I'm older and she was right. Yeah. Right? Of course, mom's always right. Right? So this is part of it. When we're young and inexperienced, here's part of the real deal. And this is autobiographical for me, but it's true, and I see it in others. You don't know what you don't know. Yep. And so if we can do this in a beautiful way, there's a benefit to the mixture, right? So when you're describing the leadership team, to speak more just like about hope, you want the passion, the energy of younger people, fresh ideas, new approaches. You want that. You also would like the stability and the maturity of more seasoned leaders. So really looking for a sweet spot of those two. Right. A quote that I heard many years ago, and it sets this up, and I've heard it attributed variously, you name it, name one of the philosophers like Aristotle or Socrates or Plato or somebody. But the quote was this: young people are full of passion and energy and certainty. And so their sentences are filled with words like always and never. And this is why they almost always overdo things. Old people have lived a long time and they've seen a lot. And their sentences are filled with words like perhaps and maybe. And this is why they almost always underdo things.
Interesting.
You get it, right?
Yeah.
So you're young and inexperienced, and you're like, this is 100% what it is. Absolutely, I'm sure of it. And then with some experience, you're like, whoa, it wasn't that simple. There was more to it. I thought I was right, found out I was wrong. Yep. That's part of experience. But the flip side is an older person can have seen so much that they're almost like they don't ever have an answer because they're like, well, I've seen it go this way. I've seen it go that way. It could be like this. It could be like that. Well, it's going to turn out like this, right? Well, it might or it might not because I remember when I saw it this way and I remember I saw it that way.
Right.
You're like, come on, dude, make a decision.
Yeah.
The very illustration is setting itself up for some integrating point of you'd like to have the passion of the younger person and the wisdom of the older person. Right. And in a sense, that's like this invitation of what this maturity gap index is talking about.
Well, and it's interesting to me, I think, when we think about that maturity gap index, we've seen a picture that we'll share of what it looks like, but it's in the back of my mind that that doesn't mean it just goes like that. You don't just by accident grow in character in a really healthy, life-giving, vibrant, flourishing kind of way. That takes effort and intentionality. And I've found is almost so much of this conversation even feels very applicable to my life and career.
Well,
but
both of us. I mean, I've lived it too. Right.
It feels striking to me to think like, I want that to be the case, right? I would love my character to grow and increase over time in a beautiful way. And to do that, how can I look and intentionally seek the wisdom, the mentorship, the guidance and leadership from those who have gone before me and done that work and model that so that I can see that reflected in my life? Because I so easily also could not, and it wouldn't go like that.
That's true. That's true. And so seeking the wisdom and the mentorship is definitely a very important thing to do. But at the same time, nothing teaches us like the actual experience, right?
True.
So think about, I bet you anybody who's listening can remember something their mom or dad told them when they were young. And now, 15 years later, now you're like, now I know why they said that.
Right.
So they taught us.
Yes.
And theoretically, if just the words of teaching were adequate, we would have changed our perspective or our behavior just by the words alone.
That's helpful.
But we probably didn't trust the words because we're like, I know better, actually. But then we get more experience, and then we're like, now I know why they said that.
Right. Got to give it time.
So in the best case scenario, you have a grace-filled environment. Because I have one advantage that you don't have. I have been the young person and I have been the more experienced person.
Yeah.
I remember as the young person thinking about the older person and being really frustrated with them. Why don't they listen to this? Right? And the older person might say, I don't think we're going to do that idea. And I've got my reasons, blah, blah, blah. And you're so frustrated. I remember it 100%. Okay. So you could be really frustrated with the older person. The older person could be really frustrated with the younger person because the older person's thinking, hey, dude, get off my back. You have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. Right. Okay. Now that's when it goes negative. But if it goes positive, the older, more experienced people are saying, we want the energy, the passion, the creativity, and the freshness. We want it. It's valuable. It's important. That's the graceful side. We're focusing on the positive side of the differences. And the younger person is trying to, with appreciation, say, we need the wisdom, the discernment, the stability, perhaps, of the more experienced people.
Good.
In a best case scenario, that would be it.
Yeah.
But to turn back, I want to sort of take this question maybe full circle. I think the original question was, what's more valuable, character or competence?
Yep. What matters more?
And by now, if somebody's getting it, they're like, I think they're saying they're both really important. Yes, they both are important.
Yeah.
But we set up the question to present a dichotomy as two different things. So how do you answer it? They're both important. But the best way I know how to answer it is, if I had somebody working with me, would I rather have very high competence and low character, or would I? Let me say it another way. Let's say it this way: would I rather have good competence with modest character, or good character with modest competence? I would take the latter.
Yeah.
Because character will shape the way that person does what they do.
Yeah.
Right? So I think when we use the word character in our culture, most of the time we're thinking it means does somebody lie, cheat, or steal? That's part of it. But when I use the word character, to me, it's more what is the fiber and the composition that makes this person who they are? Like if this was I don't know, engineering, you'd say, what's the character of that alloy, right? You'd be like, what's the nature of the makeup of this piece of steel? So when I use the word character, it's more, what's the nature and the makeup of this person? So like one piece of character would be self-awareness. So let's say a person is modestly capable, but they have high character. They might say, you know what? I think I'd like to ask for your help in this because I've learned that I'm not sure I'm very good at it. So could I ask you to help me with that?
Yeah.
That's a character thing where they're saying my competence is not great. My character is leading me to ask for help. The person who has high competence but low character will forge into places where they're not good and they won't have enough self-awareness and they won't know to ask for help. Or they're still young enough to want to show the whole world how great they are, which most young, capable, bright people are wired that way. And so that's more of the way these things play out.
Yeah.
A person who is humble and self-aware and has modest capability, you can have that person do great stuff. A person who has a lot of capability but has very little character is likely to create more hardship, more poor decisions, more train wrecks or car crashes, and that can be much more challenging. So they're both really important, but in the long run, if we had to say, I'd say character would matter more.
That's good.
And that's in a culture that puts all its attention on competence.
Yeah, there's a lot for us to learn in that. All right. Well, we will share that graphic and some more of those thoughts on the Maturity Gap Index in the show notes. So be sure to check those out, linked in our description. And you'll find all of that and more at HOPEchurchRVA.com. We are so glad you joined us for this episode. We'd love to invite you to subscribe to the HOPEcast in your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend if you found it interesting. Maybe share it with some coworkers and get a conversation going. And we hope you'll join us next time.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.